Question I'm asking today, are the OPW Batin the living daylights out of our rivers? The use of the terminology is not to be funny, it is deliberate. Daylight is what the aquatic ecology depends upon, and arising out of the phenomenon worldwide of deculverting, as it's commonly referred to in the UK, the practice of removing culverts and restoring rivers to their natural state is known as daylighting. So the question, particularly in Blackpool, is why are the OPW culverting a section of river when everyone else in the world seems to be opening their rivers back up? So is culverting or covering over a river a good idea? We'll look at the Blackpool context here. On the left of your screen, you will see the section of river that is proposed to be culverted in Blackpool. On the right of the screen, you see a nice green scar, green and blue scar with the river up through the village of Blackpool. Now, the scheme is predicated on the theory that they will quicken up the flow by removing obstructions upstream, that's small arch bridges and the likes, and clearing out the river and funneling the water even faster towards Blackpool village. But when they do this, they will confine that water and that flood flow within a culvert. Think of it as a giant oversized pipe, if you will. Now, the theory is that they'll pressurize the water in that pipe and they'll get more water through the village. They will manage to confine it in that culvert by putting non-return valves and chambers and everything else throughout the village. There's, as you can imagine, all the surface water, as naturally you would expect, is connected to this river and to the culvert system. Now, Blackpool has been here before. There are extensive culvert networks right from the village centre at the church in Blackpool all the way to the River Lee, to the Christie Ring Bridge. You could say it's a shame that all the open water course is removed and the stone arch bridges and the quay walls that went with that. But we'll discuss that. But this practice went on right up to the 80s. In Blackpool, and the construction of the new Limerick Road with a culvert network. Now, the daylighting of rivers or deculverting, why is this being done around the world? Well, one of the primary reasons is that it actually reduces flood risk. So while the OPW are using it as flood risk scheme or flood relief scheme in Blackpool, most places are reopening their culverts because essentially culverts block, and they block a lot. And, you know, look, a lot of the blame for our recent floods in Blackpool has been attributed to the reduced capacity in the culvert system. And that happens, and you don't realize that that has happened until there's a flood. And that's what burying your drainage infrastructure underground does. That's why even on the local scale of sites and developments, there's a move away from underground pipe work to things like swales, which are open channels, so that when there's a blockage, you know there's a blockage long before the massive rainfall event comes. So the industrial era culverts, of which there is one branch of from Blackpool down to Ladies Well Brewery and to the Lee, they're aging and they're at risk of collapse. And when they collapse, they significantly reduce the capacity of the drainage network more than the deposition and the blockages or part blockages that have happened in the past. And what would happen there is that the flooding would be catastrophic in the extreme if there's a collapse of your essentially your underground river network. Now, there's all sorts of benefits in terms of environmental biodiversity, light to the water course, increasing fish life and aquatic life. Even for us humans, green and blue spaces are proven, multiple studies, that these are good for our mental health. They visually are aesthetically pleasing to us. These rivers and these green spaces, they mask the city noise, they reduce the urban heat effect. Now, if you're not well disposed to environmental or flooding issues, purely on economics, being next to water increases the property value. That's proven everywhere. You just have to walk around Cork City, look at the houses that front onto the loch, that front onto the Lee, that where there is water, that's where people want to be. That's the amenity that they want to enjoy. So that transfers into property values. You can get increased footfall next to water if it's beneficial to people and people are naturally drawn to your rivers and your quaysides. That's where businesses feel the economic bounce. And again, if you're purely on the local authority side, there's reduced maintenance costs associated with open rivers than there are with culverts. We've seen the blocked trash screens that have to be constantly maintained. We've seen that they're not maintained. We see what happens when there's a disaster. We talked about the scheme itself and all the non-return valves that have to be maintained and can get blocked and stuck on open in all these underground chambers. And the maintenance is massive, and you just don't have that with open channels. Now, who is saying that daylighting is a good idea? The short answer is everyone. The Swiss have it enshrined in policy and regulations. As I said, the Brits are looking at this in a big way, and they've taken a lot of action, which we'll go into later. But you could say, look, they're both outside the EU, but in the centre of the screen, you see that the European Environmental Agency have a document on our rivers and lakes in European cities, and they refer to deculverting and daylighting in a big way in there as well. But what do the engineers say? You could say that, look, that's all environmentalists, that's all nice to have, but the Chartered Institute of Water and Environment Management, they have a policy statement, CIWEM. This is the go-to organisation for membership for any engineers working in water in Ireland, outside of Engineers Ireland itself. And look, their policy statement, they call for the active promotion of deculverting in national and regional government planning guidance and by public bodies and local planning authorities. Now, that might have you scratching your head of why Cork City Council are so keen to promote the OPW scheme for culverting the last open section in Blackpool, never mind, say, engaging consultants to look at deculverting. Now, since the mid-90s, this is a quote from the same document, since the mid-90s, the negative impacts of culverting watercourses on flood risk, ecology and amenity have been acknowledged. This is not pioneering stuff. This is well known and well accepted for a long time. Other quotes taken from that document and their work point out, policy makers should recognize that burying watercourses below ground is rarely the optimal solution. And look, again, that's very relevant to Blackpool because there are other solutions. And that's not me saying it again, that's the OPW saying it. There's a lower cost feasible solution for solving the flood risk in Blackpool. So when you take all that together, and this is really the optimal solution, why are we doing it? So look, CIWEM considers that there should be active identification and promotion of opportunities to restore urban watercourses, no matter how small, to realise benefits for local community and environment. Again, look, that's the other end of the spectrum. We're talking here about culverting and closing off a section where the rest of the world have moved well beyond that. So who's putting their money where their mouth is? Well, the South Koreans have undertaken one of the largest projects of its type in Seoul. I won't even try to pronounce or attempt to pronounce the name of the scheme, but it's well documented. It really is the poster boy for this type of scheme because you see what was there before, a wide highway, And this might resonate with people looking at the Limerick Road coming out of Cork, and they may be surprised to know that there's quite a large section of the Bride under their feet. The benefit of this is that there's 60,000 people visit this river section now in Seoul every day. That's a phenomenal amount. I'm not saying that that's transferable to every location, but it is an indication of the amenity value and what people value, and they vote with their feet accordingly. So can this be done on a smaller scale? Yes, it can. They've done it in Sheffield, Porter's Brook, to be precise. In Sheffield, they've done what would be termed pocket daylighting, just taking small sections in a realization that you can't, there's constraints that mean you can't open up large scale, full lengths of the watercourse at any one time. But bit by bit, you can create a kind of a necklace or rosary bead, if you want, of little pocket daylighting sections, and eventually join them up when the constraints are overtaken by other events. This one just, again, illustrates what was there before on the left and what can be done now in terms of amenity and reducing flood risk, most importantly. Another case study over in America, I like this picture on the left because it shows they were way ahead of us in terms of the transfer to a car-based society. And you can see they covered over the river to create large plazas, large areas for cars at the time. And that realizing the error of their ways, they have opened up the this section of watercourse in Yonkers. And we spoke about Sheffield. That one I showed you in Sheffield has been the spur to the centre of Sheffield, are now looking at opening up the River Sheaf, and another demonstration of the value that Sheffield are relying upon for the city centre opening of the river is the case of Rochdale. Now, Rochdale is the only borough in Manchester now that has a river running through, an open section of river through the centre of the town. And that's a boast for the town now. You'll see the top left-hand corner what they had. Again, completely paved over in Victorian times, and that's where this type of engineering and culverting of rivers belongs, in industrial Victorian times. And it was paved over to make way for cars and trams. There's a section there, the blue line shows where the river ran on the top right-hand corner through the town. And down at the bottom, you see the finished product now of a section of deculverting. And again, that provides a sense of identity to the place. Longbridge in the Midlands, an area decimated by the closure of MG Rover. What's the reaction to that in terms of urban renewal, heavily focused on opening back up the river, and again, left before, right after, incomparable in terms of the sense of identity for the place and sparking a renewal. These sections are just to further illustrate where else it has been done, in London to Oslo, and these sections themselves, you can read them later, but they're taken from that European Environment Agency document just to show that they are actively promoting and to back up my claims that it is in there in a big way, deculverting. In terms of aspirations, we've looked at what's happened in the UK. Now, everywhere from Coventry to Wickham are looking at deculverting. Again, showing sections that were culverted in the 60s, what was left there on the right, and then the grand plans that they have to rejuvenate their town centre and centred on opening up the river. It's actually policy now in Wickham, and this has happened after a lot of campaigning. So they've enshrined it in their local area plans. Wherever possible, all opportunities should be taken to improve the value and quality of river corridors through restoration and enhancement, particularly through deculverting. And what might be noteworthy here in the Blackpool context is the final sentence: permission will not be granted for the culverting of watercourses. Now, I can see that Wickham is a bulwark of enlightened thinking, you know, in terms of Cork. You know, we possess all the same ambitions, I would hope, as Wickham District Council. And daylighting ambitions, again, all over London, they're identifying their network of underground rivers which were culverted during Victorian times. And again, there's a lovely photo of the admittedly great craftsmanship that was put into culverting these rivers with brick culverts. But in terms of asset management, these are aging. These are now a liability because they do come from that time. And you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner a scene very familiar immediately prior to past floods in Blackpool itself, blocked trash screens. And we know that that manifested itself in collapsed trash screens and shock loading of water to an undercapacity culvert system. So is daylighting of the Bride, Killen, rivers in Blackpool and Watercourse Road, is it a dream or is it a necessity? Again, look, you could say that this is nice to have and it's all theoretical and they're doing it around the world, but look, we'll be our usual laggards, you know, and let's see it working everywhere else for 20 or 30 years before we jump on that bandwagon. But look, is it a necessity? I'll give you one reason why we should seriously be looking at this in Blackpool itself. At the junction of Madden's buildings, the Watercourse Road and the North City Link Road, the culvert splits in two. There's two branches. One is the Brewery branch, which heads down Watercourse Road, and the other, there's a kind of a H-shaped arrangement out into the Bride, Killen, culvert, which runs to Christie Ring Bridge along the North City Link. Now, the picture on the left shows the deposition inside the culvert system at this point. The bottom right-hand corner shows their own surveys of large debris at one point accumulating, and where there's other deposition. The top right-hand corner shows the clearing of the material that was removed from the culvert. Now, there's two things here. If you were to daylight a section of river at this point, at least you'll be able to see this and you'll be able to remove it a lot easier. Now, where that material has been removed back to Blackpool Village, carted back the way to the mound you see on the top right-hand corner. If you extend the culvert system another 300 meters, like they're proposing, you've got a long way now to bring all that material out. It becomes even more inaccessible, this section. And what about the Brewery Culvert itself? One of those branches, this is the culvert and this is the state of it. This is where the flood risk for Blackpool lies. A lot of the capacity of getting water out of Blackpool goes through this aging culvert in what could be deemed a precarious condition, if not feeble condition. Again, if you had sections daylight along this, at least any collapse becomes more accessible for you in terms of maintenance and emergency works. But the question remains, why would you increase the flow into your culvert system by removing upstream constraints on the River Bride when you've got a very limited capacity and a buried network where you don't know what's exactly going on till there's a problem? Why would you increase the flow through Blackpool when you have this at the other end? So what can be done if daylighting isn't on the agenda for Blackpool right now? And we're well aware that it isn't, given the proposals that have been made. And for starters, I just propose don't make the problem worse. Don't extend the culvert network. Don't remove the upstream flow restrictions, funneling higher flows, pressurized flows into an existing culvert system, an aging culvert system that has blocked in the past, that debris has accumulated in, that has been, you know, a large unquantified influence on past flooding events. So look, there is another solution. The OPW have deemed it feasible. It's upstream catchment control. The benefits of that is that it'll slow the flow going into the culvert system. So that risk of collapse at the Brewery Culvert is now reduced because you don't have the same force of water in it. You may get longer out of your asset. That H-shaped arrangement at Madden's buildings, you can access it easier. It's not ideal, but at least you're going from the church down as far as Madden's buildings rather than the shopping center down to Madden's buildings and back again with your wheelbarrows of debris and material washed into the culvert network. So that ends the presentation. Thank you for listening.